Well, hello. I've done a lot of different things in the 3 weeks since Warren and I got a send-off prayer just before this service on September 28th. And it was actually 4 weeks ago that I last was in the pulpit and celebrated, which was quite obvious at the 8 o'clock service, not like riding a bicycle, apparently. Here are some of the things that I did. I visited the birth and burial places of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., and I touched one of the pulpits that he preached from. I walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. I discovered at the legacy sites in Montgomery that when my father was 13, a white mob killed a young black man in the small northern Alabama town where he lived. The following weekend, I drove up to Baltimore to meet up with Mary for the annual general meeting of the Jane Austen Society of North America. This is like a huge convention of both serious Jane Austen scholars and fangirls and some boys, and it's wonderful. And a lot of people get very much into it and dress up with actual authentic 18th century garb. There are talks and dinners and on Saturday night a ball. So along with about 300 other people, I did some English country dancing, and that was wonderful. The next day, I came back down to Williamsburg in time to speak at Rabbi David Katz's 15th anniversary party at Temple Bethel. And I got like applause as I walked up and special thanks for our hospitality for the High Holy Days. Can't tell you how many people made a point of reaching out to me and telling me how much they appreciate that we offer our space to them for that. This past Thursday, I drove up to Richmond Hill for the second gathering of Ruah, my spiritual direction training program, and I ran into our friends Andy Ballantyne and David Castle in the hall there. That was fun. And then I came back Friday in time to speak at the sunset ceremony at William and Mary, which is an annual remembrance of those from the wider tribe who have died in the previous year. And so I got to chat a little bit with William & Mary's president, Catherine Rowe, who, along with her husband, Bruce Jacobson, is one of the people who signed the thank you there, because they were here for the High Holy Days as well. And yesterday, I shook hands with the mayor of Newport News and waved my little American flag with about 1,100 fellow citizens of all races and persuasions and parties and opinions on every subject you can imagine, including an 84-year-old Army veteran named Gloria, who said, "I think hope is the thing. Hope is what it's all about. Vote, hope, and pray." And at the 8 o'clock service, Ann Kelly reminded me to tell you that there are flyers out in the narthex which have some instructions for voting and can help you do that. And let us know if you need a ride or whatever. So it's been an eventful 21 days, and I did spend 6.5 of them in the office, which was not enough time, I can tell you, to get everything done that I have attempted to get done in these weeks. But as Dorothy said when she returned from Oz, "Oh, Annie M., there's no place like home." As Joshua told you last week, he had already texted me last Saturday night to say I'm not allowed to leave anymore, that bad things happen. And that was before what happened at the service last week. If you weren't here, you might have seen in Joshua's note in the cloak, we had a medical issue that paused the service. Carolyn Ito fainted, and she's fine. I talked to her and gotten her permission to refer to her. She's watching at home on YouTube. We love you, Carolyn. When I finally watched the recording, I saw what Joshua and some others of you had told me about the incredible icon of the church that you all were last Sunday. Care, prayer, calm presence, compassion, and grace is what he called out. David Jolly was leading the prayers, if you weren't here. So the first indication that something was going on is that he looked with concern toward the choir. This is on the recording. And then the nurses and the doctors in the congregation sprang into action, including Sarah, who handed Rowena to Joshua and then went over to attend to Carolyn. Jeff paused the live streaming until the ambulance had come and gone. And at the offertory, instead of the peppy anthem, which the choir had prepared, Phaedra sang this beautiful song with the refrain, "Our lives are in your hands." And it brought tears to my eyes watching that. And so when I talked to Carolyn, she admitted it was a kind of strange sensation to be wheeled out to the ambulance in her choir robe. And so I suggested that it was just a kind of doing the work of evangelism, as we hear about in the letter to Philip today, that she was bringing the good news out into the world. And what you don't know, but I've also gotten permission to share, is that Laura and Florence were watching the service at home. And so when Joshua announced what was going on, they ran to change out of their pajamas and get going to the hospital. Turns out they went to Riverside first and then to Centera, where she was. And so I think this is like something we might want to think about, deploying people, at home to watch the service near all of the local, hospitals, so that we can just be right there, ready to attend to each other. I jest, but it was so moving to see you all being the body of Christ in that moment, to just be holding Carolyn in prayer, to be tending to one another, whether nearby or afar. It really is carrying out your ministry fully, again, as we're enjoined in the letter to Philip. And that's what it's all about, right? Our life with Christ. I had the honor of talking before this service with our 5 candidates for baptism who will be baptized on November 2nd, including Sheldon and Sky, and Sheldon's siblings who are in Children's Chapel. And we talked about that, about how baptism makes real what is already true, that they are part of God's family, and that they're continuing their lifelong journey of walking with Jesus, following Jesus, and wrestling with God, we could say, in the imagery from that first reading of Jacob and the angel. And we don't do that alone, right? We do that together. And so that's the grace of this community, of any community. I wore my stole today that was given to me by the Church of the Redeemer in Morristown, New Jersey, when I left there after 9 months of being there interim. And they signed the back of it all too, and the fabric was given by each person, so it's kind of a living embodiment of that tapestry that a congregation can be. And I was just so struck by how it was all wrapped in prayer last week, and that resonated because that was the theme of my Ruah session up at Richmond Hill, prayer. And in preparation, we read a book called Seeking God, The Way of St. Benedict. And I will say that although at least sometimes a tender and connected member of the Benedictines here at St. Martin's for most of the last 8 years that I've been here, I had never read the rule full through until this summer when I had it for homework. And I found in that, and particularly in this book that we read by Esther DeWall, incredible resonance with what feels like so essential to me, and what I think are some part of the DNA of this congregation as well. The themes of the rule she lifts up are roots, belonging, community, fulfillment, sharing, space, listening, silence, making allowance for human weakness, and entering into the paschal mystery of suffering and dying and rising. If you've been here a while, you've heard me talk about that many a time. In summary, living a life, she says, that is earthed in Christ. And that was just so evident, so powerful, that that this community that we have had the grace to connect with, this is our route to God together. And there was a synchronicity that kind of connected this for me. On my Alabama trip had reawakened my curiosity about my father's side of the family. I haven't been much in touch with them since he died. And in digging around and looking, I discovered, or perhaps rediscovered, that my grandfather, who had died before I was born, only 3 years actually after that killing in Decatur, he died on October 17th. And so I was at Richmond Hill in another community of prayer on that day to remember him. But it wasn't until I was giving my talk at the sunset ceremony that night, quoting an anthem that the choir was doing, that I realized the resonance of these words. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings. And I just felt the truth of what Phaedra sang last week, that our lives are in God's hands, that we are really surrounded by that love that is not going to let us go. So I'm feeling a particular prayer of gratitude for all of you, for this community, for our walk in love with Christ. And so, as you know, we're in a season of gratitude and giving, and many of you have filled out little cards that are posted on the windows out there. There's some more if you haven't done it yet, but so I'll just tell you a couple of things. They're worth looking at for sure. A couple of things that people have lifted up about reasons to be thankful for this community, that all are welcome, that we celebrate all God's children, that we give a home for the co-op and AA, that we have jobs for everyone. That's something to think about, especially next week at the ministry fair. That we can discuss hard things, we can ask questions. There's a loving and gracious spirit here, a sense of shared purpose. And another of the versions of the card asks, what does it feel like to be at St. Martin's? And I read, a warm embrace after a long, arduous journey, being happy, a big hug, home, being part of the light in the darkness. And so again, Phaedra's song has just been echoing in my head and heart all week. And I think this is really true. It's a startling claim, but I see the truth of it being lived out here among us. Our belief in you, O Lord, is only a shadow of your faith in us, your deep and lasting faith. Our love for you will grow. Your light in us will shine. Thanks be to God.